We are going to carry on with our journey with God Passers-by. As per usual, I'm going to do a quick recap for you, and then actually we're going to take a slight detour where we're going to talk about the Kitab Bayan. So that's one of the last things that we were led up to into our chapter. So what did we cover last week? And I'm going to try and cover this as briefly as possible. We know that the Bab was in Marku. With the whole chapter is dealing with the presence of the Bab in Azerbaijan, in this region here. And he was in Marku, in the prison city. We know that in his prison, in his cell, there was no lamps at night, so it was dark at night. He was in solitary confinement. There wasn't even a door on his cell, which you might think is good news, but there were 2 guards and 4 dogs outside, preventing him from leaving. So the Bab was in isolation. Guests were not allowed to visit His Holiness. The Bab very much wants to receive guests, and he says to his amanuensis, he says, don't worry, I'm going to speak to Ali Khan, who's the governor, and I'm going to make something happen. Next, we hear about this story where Ali Khan is walking along by the river. He hears this beautiful melodious chanting. Lo and behold, it's His Holiness the Bab. He flips out and he's wondering why the Bab's been allowed to leave the prison. He goes up towards the cell of the Bab, only to find that the Bab is still there. Absolutely dumbfounded at this point, he completely switches his behavior. The Bab says, I can be in 2 places at once. Don't think for a second that I'm confined here because you're forcing me to be here. So after this whole prayer, that Ali Khan is now nice, is allowing people to visit slowly. Ali Khan then has this dream. He dreams that the Prophet Muhammad and one companion has basically come all the way to Marku and is trying to come into the fort. The next day, he wakes up and he's convinced that something's going to happen. Something very special is going to happen. He runs out, he goes to the gates, he gets 3 of his best horses, and he goes outside only to meet none other than Mullah Hussein. Now, Mullah Hussein, who was all the way in Mashhad, decides to go and visit the Bab in Marku, but out of respect, he decides to go by foot. So he goes on foot all the way, he comes up to Marku, and while he's there, Ali Khan embraces him and expresses so much love, and he explains this dream that he had the night before. He then says, look, I've brought these horses, please jump on the horse, come up and see the Bab. Mullah Hussein refuses. He says, I will not do this, I've walked all the way out of respect, and I'll carry on walking the rest. Some of the secret agents of the regime find out that things have been relaxed for Ali Khan. And it's at this point they decide to tell the government to try and get the Bab moved to Chehreg. While in Chehreg, Yahia Khan, who was the governor of the town, basically the jail warden, he's very strict, and he's the brother-in-law actually of Muhammad Shah. So he's very strict in Chehreg, down in this area here. And he's stopping people coming, but of course things start to change. The ulamas, the sayyids, people of note start following the Bab and converting. 2 people we learn about, Mirza Asadullah, who's surnamed Bayan, and also in Nawab from India, someone in India who has a dream about the Bab telling him to come. And of course, he, all the way from India, walks all the way to see the Bab, sees the Bab for, I think, a day or so, and then turns around and then heads back to it. Absolutely amazing. Then again, the agents start complaining, and Dayon's father, actually, Dayon, who's now believes in the faith and is this remarkable character, his father is friends with Haji Mirza Agassi and tells Agassi. Agassi is then saying, right, we must do something, so we're going to bring the Bab to Tabriz. While in Tabriz, the Bab is interrogated, he's looked at by a doctor to see if he's okay, to see if he's not okay, and this is when the Bab's sent outside the city, he's not allowed in the city. The Bab then goes into this meeting where everybody's there, including the heir to the throne, Nasruddin Shah. He's not the Shah at this moment. He's only 17 years old. The Bab goes, sits on his chair, and there he declares, I am the one whose name you have invoked for over 1,000 years. As a result of this, Mullah Muhammad of Mamagani is there, and he starts cursing him, he starts swearing at him. Other people speak to him, and they say, look, where's your proof? The Bab says, look, I will give you proof. I will reveal something the equivalent size of the Quran within 2 days and 2 nights, something that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, took 23 years to write. This is not to imply that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, isn't capable of doing this, but this is the rapidity. This is the time we're in where the revelation calls for something different. After this, the Bab receives the bastinado. He's beaten on his feet and then is sent back to Chehreg. They do not know what to do with him at all. Whilst in Marku, the Bab has written over 500,000 verses on various themes such as prayers, homilies, doctrinal dissertations, exhortations, commentaries, epistles to all the rulers, all the governors of the main towns. The Qayyum al-Asma, which was written down in Shiraz, was a very powerful piece of work. But here in Marku, he also works on something called the Khasayel al-Sabeh, the Surah Balash that we read about earlier, And as I said, he wrote to the divines of all these cities. He even wrote to not just the Persian cities, he even wrote to the divines of Karbala and Najaf, which, like I said, are like the Oxford and Cambridge of the Islamic world. We then went into some of the books he'd revealed. And this is where I want to take a slight break, with your permission, and go into some depth into the Persian Bayan. All of these texts are so powerful. You have to understand, certainly with the Gayyum al-Azmar, this was the main text that the Babis had. This text in particular, the Gayyum al-Azmar, was the most powerful piece of writing that people had for the first maybe 4 years. People would go around Iran with just the verses of the Gayyum al-Azmar. So we have the Gayyum al-Azmar. The Gayyum means the one who will arise, self-arising. What he's doing there, we're writing this title, the name, the Gayyum al-Azmar, for the commentary on the Surah of Joseph. Instead of using the word Joseph or Yusuf, as it would be in Arabic in the title, he uses the term Gayyum. And what's very interesting, if you look at the abjad values, and I keep mentioning this, where A is 1, B is 2, and so on and so forth, Gayyum has a value, when you add the value of all the letters up, of 156. Yusuf, Joseph, also has an abjad value of 156. So by calling this document the Gayyum al-Azmar, the Bab is saying that Gayyum, him who shall arise, who's self-subsisting, he actually is Joseph. He is Yusuf. And this is the point that he's making in this book. This absolutely phenomenal book, which we will touch on later. Then, as I say, there's a bunch of other documents and books that come through, but one of them is the Persian Bayan. So with your permission, I just want to go a little bit into the Persian Bayan.
Can I ask a question quickly, please, Dave? I don't understand why it's referring to Yusuf rather than Jesus or Muhammad or...
There are plenty of references to both Muhammad and Jesus and the rest of it. We know that they are the return of His Holiness Christ. And there are many categories actually that they hit. But this whole story of Yusuf, what happens with the story of Joseph effectively is that Joseph is there with his father Jacob. His brothers get very jealous. So his brothers basically kick him out. They force him, and he then goes to Egypt. He's then sold as a slave. And eventually the brothers who are with Jacob, they go into Egypt and they try and find some food and some provisions. It turns out by this point that Joseph has now a very eminent position. Joseph absolutely forgives them, gives them loads of food, and says, take my coat and give this to my dad, Jacob. Jacob, who apparently he's gone blind because he's cried so much, can smell this and take this. And this is a story. What happens in this, it's about bringing together two different groups of people, two tribes basically. So when poor Joseph was separated from his family and there was this break, he is now brought back together. Similarly, in a way, it could be argued that one of the interpretations is that with Yusuf, like Joseph, how he brought the family back together, perhaps Baha'u'llah is coming. And this seeming split that we have of Shia and Sunni, these two main sort of divisions of Islam, Baha'u'llah is going to sew these back together, and with other faiths as well. So that's one of the things, one of the interpretations that's taken in there. But a very good question, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the Persian Bayan is something I want to go into. And honestly, each of these books, the Gayyum al-Azmar, we could do an entire session on and actually several sessions on. And there's probably better placed people than myself to actually run those sessions. We have scholars that are with us. But the Persian Bayan is something that I'm going to, with your permission, just go through and try and share some thoughts and some things on, taken from God Passes By. So we know from God Passes By, we have some various quotes which I've pulled out. One of them being this, that within the walls of that same fortress, of Makku we're talking about, the Bayan, that monumental repository of laws and precepts of the new dispensation of the Treasury, enshrining most of the Bab's references and tributes to, as well as his warning regarding him whom God will make manifest, was revealed. So the Bab is laying down what's going to happen. We also know that the Persian Bayan is peerless among the doctrinal works of the founder of the Babi dispensation. There's 9 varheads of 19 chapters. So there's these 9 sections of 19 chapters, except the last varhead, which compromises of only 10 chapters. This body of work, this Persian Bayan, is approximately 8,000 verses long. And as we know, there's the Persian Bayan and then there's the Arabic Bayan. And the Arabic Bayan, you shouldn't confuse the two of them. They were revealed during the same period, but this has 11 varheads of 9 chapters and there's only 420 verses. So you see it's about 5% of the size. It's a lot smaller. We know that this book, it fulfills the Muhammadan prophecy that a youth from Bani Hasham will reveal a new book and promulgate a new law. So the Bab was from the tribe of Bani Hasham. It's wholly safeguarded from the interpolation and corruption, which has been the fate of so many of the Bab's lesser works. So this is absolutely untouched, pure work that we have. The book occupies a pivotal position in Baha'i literature, should be regarded primarily, and this is something I mentioned before, as the eulogy of the Promised One, rather than just a bunch of codes and laws and ordinances designed to be a permanent guide to future generations. This book at once abrogated the laws and ceremonials enjoined by the Quran. Some of the laws that are abrogates are things such as the way in which prayer is done in some forms. Fasting, the Baha'i fast is obviously different in terms of duration, things like marriage, divorce, and inheritance. So it kind of refreshes some of the ways in which these things that should be done. It also upholds in its integrity the belief that the prophetic mission of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, even as that is the gospel and the divinity of Christ, are very much supported by the Bab. It moreoverly interprets into a masterly fashion the meaning of certain terms frequently occurring in the sacred books of the previous dispensation, such as paradise, hell, death, resurrection, the return, the balance, the hour, the last judgment, and the like. So there's certain things that the Bible will take, and in a masterly fashion, he'll reinterpret what all of these means, which again, you have to realize the Bible is coming to slap everything, to make everything new, to refresh everything and give it this new vibrating force.
So, should we be reading the Bayan as well as Baha'u'llah's laws?
So the laws of Baha'u'llah supersede the laws of the Bab. So I think they're interesting perhaps to read just from a point of view of trying to understand the bigger picture, but right now, no, the laws of the Bayan are superseded by that of Baha'u'llah. Looking at the Bayan here, it says that the Guardian's written that it's designedly severe in the rules and regulations it imposes, revolutionizing its principles it instills, calculated to awaken them from the age-long torpor from the clergy and the people, and to administer a sudden and fatal blow to the obsolete and corrupt institutions it proclaimed through its drastic provisions, the advent of the anticipated day, the day when the summoner shall summon to a stern business, when he will demolish whatever hath been before him, even as the apostle of God demolisheth in the ways of those that have preceded him. So again, he's coming down, he's bringing these laws, he's having this break. Islam is truly loved by Baha'is, by Babis. It's the faith that we come from. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is so very, very dear to us. But just as the same with the teachings of the Bab and some of the laws of the Bab, once Baha'u'llah comes, these things are abrogated. Not to mean that they were wrong, but the time has changed and has moved forward. One very interesting thing from the Persian Bayan is something written in the third Varhead. And it's this quote here: "Well is it with him in his prophetic announcement, who fixeth his gaze upon the order of Baha'u'llah, and rendereth thanks unto his Lord, for he will assuredly be made manifest. God hath indeed irrevocably ordained it in the Bayan." So this is before Baha'u'llah has come out. This is around 1848 that this is written. That in the third Bayan, he mentions the name Baha'u'llah. He really goes into it and mentions. So the Persian Bayan, each of our head, begins with an Arabic summary of its contents, which makes it easier to read than many of the Bab's works. Not to say that this is an easy thing to read in any way, shape, or form. We know that Professor E.G. Brown had tried to do a translation, and this has been described by the scholar Nader Saidi as one of the worst translations ever. Despite his Persian and his Farsi being absolutely sublime, he wasn't able to grasp some of the inner meanings of Islam, and his knowledge of Islam wasn't quite high enough as it should be. And there's many references that are made from this. So if you look at the writings of the Bab, you'll find some extracts of this. Then we know the Frenchman A.L.M. Nicolas, I'm trying to sound really French when I do that, A.L.M. Nicholas translated the entire work into French into 450-page volumes. But again, as Baha'i, this isn't the Baha'i translation, the Bible translation, which is usually so meticulous. The Baha'is obviously believe that the Bayan was written and it wasn't completed. Remember I said that there were these 9 sections with chapters, the Baheads, that are all 19 each, apart from the last one, which only has 10. The Bible explained that it would be the task of him whom God shall make manifest. So he's given this task onto Baha'u'llah, saying that he would complete the Persian Bayan. How amazing is this, that the Bible is writing all these works, and I'm sure the Bible could complete it if he wants, but he's making this link and he's saying, no, Baha'u'llah will come and do this. So again, everything he's doing in the Persian Bayan, he's trying to turn people's heads to Baha'u'llah. Time and time again, he's trying to say, Baha'u'llah's coming, Baha'u'llah's coming. So we believe the Kitab-i-Igan to be the completion of that. Just touching quickly on the Arabic Bayan, we know there's just 420 verses. This was written roughly late 1847, 1848, and then Chehreg, the second prison city that the Bab was in, maybe part of this, was finished. A.L.M. Nicolas refers to it as the epitome of the Baha'i teachings. Now we're going to look at some of the harsh laws. We're going to dip into this really quick. So these are some of the laws that exist in the Persian Bayan, which might trip you out a little bit, but stick with it for now. So he says that all lands must be conquered by the Bayan. When we talk about the Bayan, we're not just talking about the book, the Bayan. The Bayan actually refers to all the writings of the Bab as well. Property of unbelievers must be seized. Now you're probably thinking, what? The properties of unbelievers must be seized? This doesn't sound Baha'i-like or Babi-like. The spoils of conquests are to be distributed. No marriage with non-believers. Unbelievers banned from 5 provinces in Iran. How crazy does this sound? That you're going to ban, when this is such a faith of unity, you're going to ban from these 5 provinces. Iran. Babis cannot allow unbelievers into their homes. What is going on? All of a sudden now you can't allow non-believers into your home? Like this, okay, this seems a bit out there. And then all books written by non-Babis should be destroyed. These laws seem completely and utterly out there and completely crazy. Now, what we've got to look at is that actually the Bab is being very, very clever here. The Bab isn't actually saying any of these things. If we go on for a little bit, if we go on, you'll see some of his other laws, the prohibition of causing grief to anything. So how is it possible to fulfill any of these other laws when this is in place? So what the Bab essentially is saying is he's trying to bring people in. He's saying there are these laws, but you can't do them, and they actually don't exist. In the same way it said that a Baha'i can marry 2 people if you can treat them equally, and Abdul Baha says you can't treat them equally, and I wouldn't recommend it anyway. But if you are able to do that, if you can treat them equally, what Baha'u'llah's effectively saying is you can't do this thing. Same with these laws. The Bab is laying it down, and he's saying that, look, this is not the way in which we're doing things. We're doing things very, very, very differently. So there are some people at the time who would maybe believe that that is the way to be done, to have this art. If someone were to claim to be the Mahdi, the Qa'im, as we see with the way Islam was practiced in Iran at that time, that what did they do to the Bab? They crucified him, effectively. They hung him up and they shot him. This is what they did to him. The Bab goes far as saying, if someone claims to be him whom God shall make manifest, so if someone's claiming to be Baha'u'llah, what should we do to him? Should we kill them? Should we hang them up? He says, no. He says, if they make that claim, you should give them a pension for the rest of their life. The fact that they've made that very claim means that it's such a great thing. This is the way in which we should treat them. Obviously, we shouldn't follow them if they're not who they claim to be. But it's a very, very, he's turning everything on its head, the amount of love that he's pouring forth and showing. So some of the more gentle spirits in the Bayan, as I said, there's the prohibition to causing grief to anything, to respond to letters, all letters promptly. So if you get a text message, you need to respond to it quickly. It's amazing, because why? This whole waiting is causing people grief. Answer all cries of babies, apparently. So if you've got any babies crying in the background, which you've muted your mics, which I appreciate, you should go and answer their cries. You shouldn't leave them. Even the baby, you shouldn't leave to grieve. You can't restrict the movement of anyone. So having slaves and the rest of it, you can't control people like that. There should be no warfare, slavery, cutting off hands and stoning. No overloading of animals either should take place. So even the animals, he's reaching out and he's saying that the way we treat animals is incredibly important. Some more, and these are some of the more fun ones. Doors must be tall enough for tall people. Now, what a seemingly bizarre law. Doors must be tall enough for tall people? I mean, is this what a manifestation of God is coming to teach? But again, it's about this thing of not offending anyone. When someone goes to someone's house, if the door isn't tall enough, you end up bending down and you're asking people to almost lower themselves. So we say, no, we must make doors tall enough for everyone. Allow everyone into your house. Yes, this isn't just about tall people, really. It's about this causing grief. You should repay all loans. There's no spanking or humiliating children. So if you want to spank or humiliate children, not allowed. That's ruled out. There's actually interesting things about the hitting of children, how you were only allowed to do it with a certain a certain force, a certain amount of times. And as a man, if you overstep that boundary, there's mythicals that you can pay, or there's no sleeping with your wife. Some really interesting laws. You must be perfect at everything you do. Make all handicrafts perfectly. So this idea of beauty that we find in so many things is really important to have this real beauty. You should refine your character again and beautify all things. He is trying to change the hearts. He's trying to make everything anew. This is what the Bab's trying to get us to do. Change your clothes and wash often. I, as a DJ who work in the nightclubs, I really wish to have this on a plaque, because some people don't quite get that. The message of the Bab would help me out massively. Then some of the selections from the writings of the Persian Bayan. God loveth those who are pure. Naught in the Bayan and in the sight of God is more loved than purity and immaculate cleanliness. God desireth not to see in the dispensation of the Bayan any soul deprived of joy and radiance. So again, those harsh laws, it's impossible. It can't be. He indeed desireth that under all conditions, all may be adorned with such purity, both inwardly and outwardly, that no repugnance may be caused even to themselves, how much less unto others. We know that the Bab banned the eating of garlic. That outwardly would upset people. He banned the eating of garlic. Why? So that you wouldn't offend him whom God shall make manifest. Now, was this really about the Bab worrying about offending His Holiness Baha'u'llah with the breath? Or was it making the point that him whom God shall make manifest is so close, is around the corner, that this is the important thing, that you should look out for him? It's this serious. You are not allowed to read other people's mail. Just bear that in mind when you're going through a dodgy relationship and you want to check. No reading each other's mail. You must help travelers who are weak. You must not engage in confession. We know that we don't have confession. This one, my favorite, probably, no wearing of frightening outfits in public. I mean, how great is this? You cannot go as a scary monster in public and just be like, like on your holy days. Don't do this. This is not a good thing to do. The Bab's really going down to that level of detail there. Rage and wrath prohibited. That's probably a good shout. Let's not have rage and wrath, people. And then there's a special prayer for the moments of birth and death. The Babi calendar is also introduced that makes time filled with God. And I think this is partly to do with the 19 days we have in each month and the 19 months. And
Dave, can I actually ask a question? Because it's going to bother me otherwise. Like, a few slides ago when you were talking about the harsh laws, and there's one about, like, I think destroying all books that are non-Babi books, basically. Why do you think, like, because I almost became a librarian and I have an affinity for books, and I'm just wondering, why do you think destroying texts that are, from a different religion or whatever, why do you think that law exists?
Well, again, dear Nadia, the whole point of what I'm saying here is that these laws don't exist. We don't want to destroy all books. There was this way of seeing things that actually, if they don't fit within a certain bracket, we should destroy them because they're blasphemous. They're from the kafir. They're against God, and that's not what it is. So the Bible's saying, yes, destroy all books, don't cause harm to things, don't do these things. Every one of these laws, there's a rebuttal where he's saying, no, don't do this. So for a second, I mean, the love that the Bab has for the Holy Quran is insane. Like, you think he ever wants that to be destroyed, or the Torah, or the Bhagavad Gita, or any of these books? Absolutely not. So it's not actually something that he's saying go ahead with and go forth with and do. Not in the slightest. He's actually saying don't do these things. And there are people at the time that think some of these laws are okay. I hope you do become a librarian.
Add something to that. So going back to the purpose of the Bible revelation, it was basically to break away entirely with Islam and its traditions, like to really prepare the ground for the coming whom God shall make manifest, and really like establish this clear breaking away. So the way I understand these harsh laws is essentially to show that everything that was in place is now no longer stands, and to ensure the preeminence of the Bayon and the Babi's revelation. So all the harsh laws is basically to put in the minds of people, like, now every old standard is out of the door, and all of these new standards are taking place. So I think that's the reason why these harsh laws, and of course they are not to be applied because we have all these other laws that cancel them out. However, the psychological effect or like the spiritual effect is there. Like nothing else now stands but the Bayon.
The Bab's revelation is revolutionary on a level that we haven't seen it before. I was talking earlier with our scholar, Dr. Fanan Apazir, and he used this analogy. There was an advert a few years ago, which I found that's really funny. And there was a drink called Tango in England. And people would wear these big orange gloves and they'd go up to people and they'd go slap on their face. And the whole thing was, you've been tangoed. And he was saying it's almost like the revelation of the Bab is tangoing people. It's sort of saying to people, come on, wake up, this is it. This big sharp burst that really just judders people. Now, of course, the Babi revelation, the Babi faith, is a link between Islam. It's this bridge between Islam and the Babi faith. But as I said, the primary purpose of this is a eulogy to Baha'u'llah. Everything is turning things round to Baha'u'llah. There's also this abjad system, as I said, I keep mentioning this abjad system, where the Bab, somewhere in the Bayan, he mentions a law, then at the end, and don't quote me on the number here, but for example, he says, children, and this is one of the law, children are not allowed to sit on the floor whilst learning. Okay, he bans people from going up to the top of pulpits as well. But he'll say one of these laws, and it's not exactly this. But he'll say, children are not allowed to sit on the floor, 273. And you're like, what? And you'll see 273 is in there. And you're like, what? Why is this 273? What's this number 273 in there for? But then you will suddenly start to realize the abjad value of 273 is that Ali Qabla Muhammad verily is the Ghaib, referring to himself. So there are all these mystical things that are thrown in there. More importantly, these prophecies about Baha'u'llah. In there, he talks about how Baha'u'llah will come after 19 years, and there's this mention of how something will happen in 9 years. We know that the Bab's revelation started in 1844. Baha'u'llah, 9 years later, and the CHR receives his revelation. So there are all these signs that are in there. It's such a deep work. But anyway, hopefully that gives you a brief overview of the Bayan. As I said, we could talk for hours and hours, and I'm aware we're here to study God Passes By, but I thought it was unfair to just gloss past some of these things. So
thank you for sharing about the Bayon. A quick comment about the Babi calendar. I find it quite interesting that it seems, from my very limited understanding, it seems that it's one of the only things installed by the Bab that has been carried on into the Baha'i revelation, the Babi calendar, and of course we have the prayers. And I was wondering why is that so? And then I thought that perhaps it's because keeping that is really a way of integrating the Babi dispensation into the Baha'i one, and also because the Baha'i dispensation and more than that, the Baha'i cycle, I think, era starts in 1844. So then it makes complete sense that because the Baha'i era starts in 1844, that we are essentially using the calendar that was given by the Bab himself. Maybe there are other explanations for that.
There are many laws as well, by the way. Just, there's many other things from the Bab that does get carried on, that Baha'u'llah does accept. There's a whole bunch of things that actually Baha'u'llah takes on and says, yes, this law stays. And all of these laws here are described as being acceptable only if him whom God shall make manifest will accept them. So it's waiting on his approval. So there's a whole bunch of laws. But again, Roxana, thank you so much for it. So with all of that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap up this little bit about the Bayon. As I said, we can go into it for days and days, and it's so remarkable. But we are going to go back into our story. We're going to get some reading done. Are there any more comments or questions before we move on? In that case, we will carry on from the Dalail Sabe, the 7 proofs. That's where we were last time. And if Miss Dawn Paris is there, if you could please kick us off reading. Thank you very much.
The Dalail Sabi, 7 proofs, the most important of the polemical works of the Bab, was revealed during that same period. Remarkably lucid, admirable in its precision, original in conception, unanswerable in its argument, this work, apart from the many and diverse proofs of his mission, which it adduces, is noteworthy for the blame it assigns to the 7 powerful sovereigns ruling the world in his day, as well as for the manner in which it stresses the responsibilities and censures the conduct of the Christian divines of a former age who, had they recognized the truth of Muhammad's mission, he contends, would have been followed by the mass of their co-religionists. During the Bab's confinement in the fortress of Cherrik, where he spent almost the whole of the 2 remaining years of his life, the Law-e-Hurufat, tablet of the letters, was revealed in honor of Dayan, a tablet which, however misconstructed at first as an exposition of the science of divination, was later recognized to have unraveled, on the one hand, the mystery of the Mushtagath, and to have abstrusely alluded, on the other, to the 19 years which must needs elapse between the declaration of the Bab and that of Baha'u'llah. It was during these years darkened throughout by the rigors of the Bab's captivity, by the severe indignities inflicted upon him, and by the news of the disasters that overtook the heroes of Mazindaran and Neyriz, that he revealed, soon after his return from Tabriz, his denunciatory tablet to Haji Mirza Agassi. Couched in bold and moving language, unsparing in its condemnation, this epistle was forwarded to the intrepid Hujat, who, as corroborated by Baha'u'llah, delivered it to that wicked minister. To this period of incarceration in the fortress of Markul and Chehrik, a period of unsurpassed fecundity, yet bitter in its humiliations and ever-deepening sorrows, belong almost all the written references, whether in the form of warnings, appeals, or exhortations, which the Bab, in anticipation of the approaching hour of his supreme affliction, felt it necessary to make the author of a revelation that was soon to supersede his own. Conscious from the very beginning of his twofold mission, as the bearer of a wholly independent revelation and the herald of one still greater than his own, he could not content himself with the vast number of commentaries, of prayers, of laws and ordinances, of dissertations and epistles, of homilies and orations that had incessantly streamed from his pen. The greater covenant into which, as affirmed in his writings, God had, from time immemorial, entered through the prophets of all ages with the whole of mankind regarding the newborn revelation, had already been fulfilled. It had now to be supplemented by a lesser covenant, which he felt bound to make with the entire body of his followers concerning the one whose advent he characterized as the fruit and ultimate purpose of his dispensation. Such a covenant had invariably been the feature of every previous religion. It had existed under various forms with varying degrees of emphasis, had always been couched in veiled language, and had been alluded to in cryptic prophecies, in abstruse allegories, in unauthenticated traditions, and in the fragmentary and obscure passages of the sacred scriptures. In the Babi dispensation, however, it was destined to be established in clear and unequivocal language, though not embodied in a separate document. Unlike the prophets gone before him, whose covenants were shrouded in mystery, unlike Baha'u'llah, whose clearly defined covenant was incorporated in a specially written testament and designated by him as the Book of My Covenant, the Bab chose to intersperse his Book of Laws, the Persian Bayan, with unnumbered passages, some designedly obscure, mostly indubitably clear and conclusive, in which he fixes the date of the promised revelation, extols its virtues, asserts its preeminent character, assigns to it unlimited powers and prerogatives, and tears down every barrier that might be an obstacle to its recognition. He verily, Baha'u'llah, referring to the Bab in his Kitab-i-Badi, has stated, hath not fallen short of his duty to exhort the people of the Bayan and to deliver unto them his message. In no age or dispensation hath any manifestation made mention in such detail and in such explicit language of the manifestation destined to succeed him. Some of his disciples the Bab assiduously prepared to expect the imminent revelation. Others he orally assured would live to see its day. To Mullah Bakir, one of the letters of the living, he actually prophesied in a tablet addressed to him that he would meet the promised one face to face, the Sayyah, another disciple, he gave verbally a similar assurance. Mullah Hussein he directed to Tehran, assuring him that in that city was enshrined a mystery, whose light neither Hijaz nor Shiraz could rival. Qudus, on the eve of his final separation from him, was promised that he would attain the presence of the one who was the sole object of their adoration and love. To Sheikh Hassan Zunuzi, he declared while in Marku that he would behold in Karbala the countenance of the promised Hussein. On Dayan, he conferred the title of the third letter to believe in him whom God shall make manifest, while to Azim he divulged in the Kitab-e-Pan Shan the name and announced the approaching advent of him who was to consummate his own revelation.
Thank you very much, Dawn. So we see the weight of what's been written here. We see that the Guardian talks about the Bab has been so explicit in his covenants that he's written, laying things out very clearly, that had in veiled language and interspersed with laws on the Bayan had given so many signs and symbols as to what would happen. We know that he had promised one of the letters of the living, Mullah Bagher, that he would go on to meet Baha'u'llah. We know that Qudus was also given that same promise. If you remember when the Bab had returned back from pilgrimage with Qudus, and he sends Qudus on his way, he says to him that we're not going to meet again. But he says you will be martyred, but you will end up going on to meet none other than Baha'u'llah. We know that Mullah Hussein was also given this promise as well. And Mullah Hussein was told he would meet God's treasure in Mazindran. And this is something I mentioned last time, that from Marku, Mullah Hussein was there for 9 days. And when he leaves, it's clear and evident that he's not going to see the Bab again. But the Bab does say to him, you will meet this treasure, God's hidden treasure in Mazandaran. Now, when I first read this, I assumed this hidden treasure is none other than Baha'u'llah, but it's not. It turns out to be Qudus, such as the station of Qudus. And you have this beautiful scene where Mullah Hussein goes and he's received by Qudus, and Qudus starts washing his feet and cleaning his blisters. And then Qudus says to Mullah Hussein, he said, what did the Bab tell you? And he shares, and then Mullah Hussein says, it looks like I won't be seeing the Bab again. And then Qudus turns around and says, he says, I want to share with you this scroll, and he unscrolls something, and he says, I want you to read this. This is something that I've written. And then Mullah Hussein starts reading this, and he's just dumbfounded, absolutely dumbfounded. And he states that this is the same truth as that of the Quran and of the writings of the Bab even. It just seems so incredible. And it's at this point, you really have things switching around when Mullah Hussein falls at the feet, literally, of Qudus and just absolutely worships Qudus from this point on. Even though Mullah Hussein was the first one to find the Bab, even though Qudus is younger, this is how much detachment he has and how much love he only has for the true light that shines. So he's absolutely in love with Qudus, and from then Qudus sends him on to do a whole bunch of things. And we also hear that Sheikh Hassan al-Zanusi, while he's in Marku, and remember he's one of the amanuenses, he's told to go down from Marku, to go to Karbala here, and then to wait for 2 years, and he decides that he's going to get married, because why not? And then he sees His Holiness Baha'u'llah in the vicinity of the shrines of Imam Hussein. Could I have a Finnish person to continue reading, please?
You're lucky that there's 2 of us here, actually, but I'll kick us.
Well.
No, you can't. I'll start. This is my cousin, everyone, so excuse our language. Do you want to start, Rosita?
Okay.
Do it.
A successor or vicegerent the Bab never named, an interpreter of his teachings. He refrained from appointing. So transparently clear were his references to the promised one, so brief was to be the duration of his dispensation, that neither the one nor the other was deemed necessary. All he did was, according to the testimony of Abdul Baha in A Traveler's Narrative, to nominate on the advice of Baha'u'llah and of another disciple, Mirza Yahia, who would act solely as a figurehead pending the manifestation of the promised one, thus enabling Baha'u'llah to promote in relative security the cause so dear to his heart.
The Bayan, the Bab in that book, referring to the promised one, affirms, is from beginning to end the repository of all of his attributes, and the treasury of both his fire and his light. If thou attainest unto his revelation, he in another connection declares, and obeyest him, thou wilt have revealed the fruit of the Bayan. If not, thou art unworthy of mention before God. O people of the Bayan, he in that same book thus warns the entire company of his followers, act not as the people of the Quran have acted, for if ye do so, the fruits of your night will come to naught. Suffer not the Bayan is his emphatic injunction, and all that hath been revealed therein to withhold you from that essence of being and Lord of the visible and invisible. Beware, beware is his significant warning addressed to Wahid, lest in these days of his revelation the Wahid of the Bayan, 18 letters of the living and the Bab, shut thee out as by a veil from him, inasmuch as this Wahid is but a creature in his sight. And again, O congregation of the Bayan, and all who are therein, recognize ye the limits imposed upon you, for such a one as the point of the Bayan himself hath believed in him, whom God shall make manifest before all things were created. Therein verily do I glory before all who are in the kingdom of heaven and earth. In the year 9, he, referring to the date of the advent of the promised revelation, has explicitly written, Ye shall attain unto all good. In the year 9, ye will attain unto the presence of God. And again, after hin, a cause shall be given unto you which ye shall come to know. Year 9 will have elapsed from the inception of his cause, he more particularly has stated. The realities of the created things will not be made manifest. All that thou hast as yet seen is but the stage from the moist germ until we clothed it with flesh. Be patient until thou beholdest a new creation. Say, blessed therefore be God, the most excellent of makers. Wait thou, is his statement to Azim, until 9 will have elapsed from the time of the Bayan. Then exclaim, blessed therefore be God, the most excellent of makers. Be attentive, he referring in a remarkable passage to the year 19 has admonished, from the inception of the revelation till the number of Wahid. The Lord of the day of reckoning, he even more explicitly has stated, will be manifested at the end of Wahid and the beginning of 80. Were he to appear this very moment, he in his eagerness to ensure that the proximity of the promised revelation should not withhold men from the promised one has revealed, I would be the first to adore him and the first to bow down before him. I have written down in my mention of him, he thus extols the author of the anticipated revelation, these gem-like words, no allusion of mine can allude unto him, neither anything mentioned in the Bayan. I myself am but the first servant to believe in him and in his signs. The year-old germ, he significantly affirms, that holdeth within itself the potentialities of the revelation that is to come, is endowed with a potency superior to the combined forces of the whole of the Bayan. And again, the whole of the Bayan is only a leaf amongst the leaves of his paradise. Better is it for thee, he similarly asserts, to recite but one of the verses of him whom God shall make manifest, than to set down the whole of the Bayan. For on that day, that one verse can save thee, whereas the entire Bayan cannot save thee. Today the Bayan is in the stage of seed. At the beginning of the manifestation of him whom God shall make manifest, its ultimate perfection will become apparent. The Bayan deriveth all its glory from him whom God shall make manifest. All that hath been revealed in the Bayan is but a ring upon my hand, and I myself am verily but a ring upon the hand of him whom God shall make manifest. He turneth it as he pleaseth, for whatsoever he pleaseth, and through whatsoever he pleaseth. He verily is the help and peril of the Most High. Certitude itself, he, in reply to Wahid and to one of the letters of the living, who had inquired regarding the promised one, had declared, is ashamed to be called upon to certify his truth, and testimony itself is ashamed to testify unto him. Addressing this same Bahid, he moreover had stated, were I to be assured that in the day of his manifestation thou wilt deny him, I would unhesitatingly disown thee. If on the other hand I be told that a Christian who beareth no allegiance to my faith will believe in him, the same will I regard as the apple of my eye. And finally is this, his moving invocation to God. Bear thou witness that through this book I have covenanted with all created things concerning the mission of him whom thou shalt make manifest, ere the covenant concerning my own mission had been established. Sufficient witness art thou, and they that have believed in thy signs. I verily have not fallen short on my duty to admonish that people, is yet another testimony from his pen. If on the day of his revelation all that are on earth bear him allegiance, mine inmost being will rejoice, inasmuch as all will have attained the summit of their existence. If not, my soul will be saddened. I truly have nurtured all things for this purpose. How then can anyone be veiled from him?
It's interesting here, if we look at this, how in the Persian Bayan, the Bab is talking about the year 9. The year 9 refers to what? So 1844 is the year 0 as far as the Bab's concerned. The revelation of the Bab, the year 0 is 1844. So when he talks about the year 9, again, we're talking about the year 1853. And as we know what happened in the year 1853, this is when Baha'u'llah receives his revelation in the Siyachar. And this is where things start moving. When we look at the different epochs, the second epoch starts with Baha'u'llah, starts in 1853. Not from his declaration in 63, but actually from 1853, when he has this vision that comes to him. We then have this mention of the year Hin, which talks about 68, which again, when I say 68, I'm talking about 1268, obviously 1844 being the year 1260 in the Islamic calendar. So if you add on to that, to 68 takes us to the year 1853. Just to be clear, the year 1260, while it's 1844, it's not January 1844. So sometimes the numbers don't seem to marry up. When you add 8, it sort of spills over a bit. So again, this is another prophecy, the year Hin. When you're talking about Hin, remember, we're using this abjad system again. If you take the value of the letters H, I, and N, you end up getting 68. Again, this system's being used. We see this line about the number of the Vahed. And the number of the Vahed, again, Vahed we know is 19. And he talks about the promised one, all glory from him shall come. All glory from him shall come in the year 19, and him who God shall make manifest shall come. So he's explicitly stating here, in the year 19. So again, if you add 1844, if you add 19 to that, you end up with 1863, which of course is where Baha'u'llah declared who he was. So there's so many signs in this Persian Bayan that talk about the coming of him. The Bab then goes on to say something so beautiful. He says, even to Vahid, someone who he absolutely adores and has been amazed, this bit here, he says, were I to be assured that on the day of his manifestation, thou wilt deny him, I would unhesitatingly disown you. So he's saying, Vahid, you've done so much, you've been so great and so amazing, but if you're not going to accept him whom God shall make manifest, what's the point? If on the other hand, I be told that a Christian who beareth no allegiance to my faith will believe in him, the same will I regard as the apple of my eye. Again, the Bab kind of taking himself out of it. It's not about whether you believe in me and blah, blah, blah. The whole point of all of this, the entire point, is to turn everyone to Baha'u'llah. This is the most important thing that he's trying to do. This is the thing that's going to quicken the spirits. Yes, the Bab is there. The Bab brings his revelation to try and have this break, to shake things up, to awaken people. And a lot of what the Bab writes is in very esoteric language. It's in language that people who are well-versed in the Quran may well understand the clerics, and this is why many of the ecclesiastical order, many of the priests and the mullahs of Islam, as it were, absolutely fell in love and found it. Hujjat, one of the 3 characters, again, remember we have the 3 battles that take place. The battle in Mazindaran, the battle in Nairis, the battle in Zanjan. And in Zanjan, this is where you have Hujjat, who was this remarkable scholar, who just reads one thing and is just blown away. Vahid, he reads this commentary on the Surah Kawsar, the Surah of Divine Plenitude. He reads this and he's just blown away. So there's a lot of this stuff going on. There's also people who aren't scholarly minded at all, who can just see the beautiful light, who can just see the love, which is the way it's meant to be.
The last 3 and most eventful years of the Bab's ministry had, as we have observed in the preceding pages, witnessed not only the formal and public declaration of his mission, but also an unprecedented effusion of his inspired writings, including both the revelation of the fundamental laws of his dispensation and also the establishment of that lesser covenant, which was to safeguard the unity of his followers and pave the way for the advent of an incomparably mightier revelation. It was during this same period, in the early days of his incarceration, in the fortress of Shirik, that the independence of the newborn faith was openly recognized and asserted by his disciples. The laws underlying the new dispensation had been revealed by its author in a prison fortress in the mountains of Azerbaijan, while the dispensation itself was now to be inaugurated in a plain on the border of Mazandaran, at a conference of his assembled followers. Baha'u'llah, maintaining through continual correspondence close contact with the Bab, and himself the directing force behind the manifold activities of his struggling fellow disciples, unobtrusively yet effectually presided over that conference, and guided and controlled its proceedings. Qudus, regarded as the exponent of the conservative element within it, affected in pursuance of a preconceived plan designed to mitigate the alarm and the consternation which such a conference was sure to arouse, to oppose the seemingly extremist views advocated by the impetuous Tahareh. The primary purpose of that gathering was to implement the revelation of the Bayan by a sudden, a complete, and dramatic break with the past, with its order, its ecclesiasticism, its traditions and ceremonials. The subsidiary purpose of the conference was to consider the means of emancipating the Bab from his cruel confinement in Shirik. The first was eminently successful. The second was destined from the outset to fail. The scene of such a challenging and far-reaching proclamation was the hamlet of Badasht, where Baha'u'llah had rented amidst pleasant surroundings 3 gardens, one of which he assigned to Qudus, another to Tahareh, whilst the third he reserved for himself. The 81 disciples who had gathered from various provinces were his guests from the day of their arrival to the day they dispersed. On each of the 22 days of his sojourn in that hamlet, he revealed a tablet, which was chanted in the presence of the assembled believers. On every believer, he conferred a new name, without, however, disclosing the identity of the one who had bestowed it. He himself was thenceforth designated by the name Baha. Upon the last letter of the living was conferred the appellation of Qudus, while Qur'at-Tolain was given the title of Tahareh. By these names, they were all subsequently addressed by the Bab in the tablets he revealed for each one of them.
While the Bab is in Shehreg, while he's in this, remember, he was in Tabriz, he'd been brought into Tabriz, and then now he's then sent back after making the declaration of who he is. They don't know what to do with him. There's this bastinado that they give him. They then take him back to Shehreg, which is around this area here. While he's there, we know that the conference of Badasht is taking place. The conference of Badasht is over here near Shahrud. This small little hamlet of about 400 people, which is still very small today. There's a goat and a cow that play with each other during the day, possibly. They are all here. And Baha'u'llah has rented this garden. This episode takes 22 days. Mullah Hussein is not with them. Mullah Hussein is he's near Mashhad with the prince. Qudus is there. Tahareh is there. Tahareh, the incredible Tahareh. By the way, she's the one who translated the Gayom al-Asma into Farsi. 8,000 verses document, basically, this book. She's the one who translated it into Persian because not everyone read Arabic. So he's there. They're in this garden. You've got Baha'u'llah, you've got Qudus, and this is where a lot of the things are being discussed. So some of the laws of the Bab and this whole concept of this being a break from Islam. It's not just a continuation of Islam. A lot of the people there, bear in mind, when they would fast, they would still do the Islamic fast. There were so many things that were still very unknown. And this is the thing that's really trying to bring the signification of this break from Islam. These new names were given out. Qudus was given his name Qudus. Tahareh, who was known as Qur'at-Tolain before that, Solace of mine eyes was her name previously, and also Fatima. She had a few different names. Did Tahareh? She was awesome. So these different names are being given out. The other thing that they were discussing, that some people want to discuss, was how do we break the Bab out of prison? completely ridiculous. Now, we know the Bab could have magicked himself out of prison if he wanted to, but this isn't the way that the faith was going to run, that they were going to break him out of prison, that they were going to come to Chehrad over here and break him out of prison. So this is where we have the conference of Badash that's now taking place, where Baha'u'llah is masterly in charge of the happenings.
It says here that 81 of the followers of the Bab were gathered, right?
Correct.
I just realized that that's the same number of continental counselors. Perhaps there is no link whatsoever, but I just find it interesting. It's the exact same number.
Roxana, I love the fact that you know how many continental councillors there are. Firstly, that's great. I had no idea. But you're right. You're absolutely right. There is a link, actually. And of course, 81, we know, is 9 times 9. There's this numerology that comes into play quite often. So this is why I think there's actually 81 people there. We know when Cont'd is marching at another time, there's 200 and I think there's 202 people or whatever, or this number 313 that we've discussed. These numbers are actually very, very deliberate. So I imagine that the council thing there may well be a link there. But what a nice bit of knowledge, Roxana. Thank you so much.
It was Baha'u'llah who steadily, unerringly, yet unsuspectedly, steered the course of that memorable episode. And it was Baha'u'llah who brought the meeting to its final and dramatic climax. One day in his presence, when illness had confined him to bed, Tahireh, regarded as the fair and spotless emblem of chastity and the incarnation of the holy Fatima, appeared suddenly, adorned yet unveiled, before the assembled companions, seated herself on the right hand of the affrighted and infuriated Quddus, and tearing through her fiery words the veils guarding the sanctity of the ordinances of Islam, sounded the clarion call and proclaimed the inauguration of a new dispensation. The effect was electric and instantaneous. She of such stainless purity, so reverenced that even to gaze at her shadow was deemed an improper act, appeared for a moment in the eyes of her scandalized beholders to have defamed herself, shamed the faith she had espoused, and sullied the immortal countenance she symbolized. Fear, anger, bewilderment swept their inmost souls and stunned their faculties. Abdul Khalid Esfahani, aghast and deranged at such a sight, cut his throat with his own hands. Spattered with blood and frantic with excitement, he fled away from her face. A few, abandoning their companions, renounced their faith. Others stood mute and transfixed before her. Still others must have recalled with throbbing hearts the Islamic tradition foreshadowing the appearance of Fatima herself, unveiled while crossing the bridge Sirat on the promised day of judgment. Quddus, mute with rage, seemed to be only waiting for the moment when he could strike her down with the sword he happened to be then holding in his hand. Undeterred, unruffled, exultant with joy, Tahireh arose, and without the least premeditation and in a language strikingly resembling that of the Quran, delivered a fervid and eloquent appeal to the remnant of the assembly, ending it with this bold assertion. I am the word which the Qa'im is to utter, the word which shall put to flight the chiefs and nobles of the earth. Thereupon she invited them to embrace each other and celebrate so great an occasion.
On that memorable day, the bugle mentioned in the Quran was sounded, the stunning trumpet blast was loudly raised, and the catastrophe came to pass. The days immediately following so startling a departure from the time-honored traditions of Islam witnessed a veritable revolution in the outlook, habits, ceremonials, and manner of worship of these hitherto zealous and devout upholders of the Mohammedan law. Agitated as had been the conference from first to last, deplorable as was the succession of the few who refused to countenance the annulment of the fundamental statutes of the Islamic faith. Its purpose had been fully and gloriously accomplished. Only 4 years earlier, the author of the Babi revelation had declared his mission to Mullah Hussein in the privacy of his home in Shiraz. 3 years after that declaration, within the walls of the prison fortress of Marku, he was dictating to his amanuensis the fundamental and distinguishing precepts of his dispensation. A year later, his followers, under the actual leadership of Baha'u'llah, their fellow disciple, were themselves in the hamlet of Badasht, abrogating the Quranic law, repudiating both the divinely ordained and man-made precepts of the faith of Muhammad, and shaking off the shackles of its antiquated system. Almost immediately after, the Bab himself, still a prisoner, was vindicating the acts of his disciples by asserting, formally and unreservedly, his claim to be the promised Qayyam. In the presence of the heir to the throne, the leading exponents of the Shaykhi community, and the most illustrious ecclesiastical dignitaries assembled in the capital of Azerbaijan. A little over 4 years had elapsed since the birth of the Bab's revelation, when the trumpet blast announcing the formal extinction of the old and the inauguration of the new dispensation was sounded. No pomp, no pageantry marked so great a turning point in the world's religious history. Nor was its modest setting commensurate with such a sudden, startling, complete emancipation from the dark and embattled forces of fanaticism, of priestcraft, of religious orthodoxy and superstition. The assembled host consisted of no more than a single woman and a handful of men, mostly recruited from the very ranks they were attacking, and devoid, with few exceptions, of wealth, prestige, and power. The captain of the host was himself an absentee, a captive in the grip of his foes. The arena was a tiny hamlet in the plain of Badasht, on the border of Mazandaran. The trumpeter was a lone woman, the noblest of her sex in that dispensation, whom even some of her co-religionists pronounced a heretic. The call she sounded was the death knell of the 1200-year-old law of Islam, accelerated 20 years later by another trumpet blast, announcing the formulation of the laws of yet another dispensation. This process of disintegration, associated with the declining fortunes of a superannuated, though divinely revealed law, gathered further momentum, precipitated in a later age the annulment of the Sharia canonical law in Turkey, led to the virtual abandonment of that law in Shia Persia, has, more recently, been responsible for the disassociation of the system envisaged in the Kitabi Akdas from the Sunni ecclesiastical law in Egypt, has paved the way for the recognition of that system in the Holy Land itself, and is destined to culminate in the secularization of the Muslim states and in the universal recognition of the law of Baha'u'llah by all the nations, and its enthronement in the hearts of all the peoples of the Muslim world.
So we know this story. We know the beauty, the light of Tahrir, of Gorat Alain. We know the story. We know what's happened, that this change has happened here. This break has happened. So much so, remember I said the person who cut his throat. I'm going to take you guys back. If you remember, there's a story where Sheikh Ahmad, we're going back into Sheikh Ahmad now, where Sheikh Ahmad met these two guys. One was Abdul Wahab and Abdul Khalik. Abdul Khalik was the very erudite one of the two. But Sheikh Ahmad wanted to spend more time with Abdul Wahab. Abdul Khalik Yazdi, this is the guy who later on, who Sheikh Ahmad didn't want to spend time with. He's the guy who slits his throat as a result. Maybe a little bit unhinged. Maybe it was just so blasphemous what he saw. So we know that during the conference of Badasht, there are 3 gardens that are rented, basically Baha'u'llah has his garden, Qudus has a garden, and Tahrir has a garden. And Baha'u'llah's kind of sick, and Tahrir is looking after him. So Tahrir is asking Qudus to come to her The servant goes and he says, no, I won't. He then goes back and says, look, if you don't chop my, if you're not gonna do it, I'd rather you just chop my head off, is what he says. And lo and behold, Godus then pulls out his sword and he's like, fine, if you want me to chop your head off, I'll chop your head off. I'm Godus, I'm the man with the sword. And then just as this happened, this is when Tyharek is there. And she's taken her veil off. And this blows people's minds, so much so that one guy, slightly unreasonable, arguably, decides to slit his throat. It might be an over-the-top reaction, I don't know, you can decide for yourself. But like, she does this, and some of the people go crazy. Now you've got these two different camps. You've got the one camp who's on the side of Godus, because Godus, it looks like from his, the expression on his face, he is furious. And he's about to strike Tyharek, is what it says. But so you've got Godus on the one side, and then you've got Tyharek, this beautiful, beautiful light, who's now showing her face. And we don't know what's going to happen. There's this huge thing. They start going against each other. And as I say, some of the people are on Tyharek's side, some of the people are on Godus' side. Some of the people are like, forget this, I'm walking away, I'm no longer part of it. Some people leave that conference, actually, and decide that they want nothing to do with the Babi faith. Baha'u'llah masterfully, then over a couple of days, brings them together. But what's beautiful, we find out that these two beautiful luminaries, Tyharek and Godus, who are against each other, actually aren't against each other at all. This whole thing, this entire thing, is actually just a play that's been put on. It's completely a play that's been put on so that people who would initially take one side or the other would have someone that they could liaise with and someone they could say, right, well, I believe in you, I believe in you. And then they could calm down and slowly realize that this was signifying a break from the laws of Islam. This was the very point that was showing forth that this is a new faith, a new revelation. It's not just a continuation of Islam. So that entire thing was actually a play. This drama that we know in the Dawnbreakers, it's something like 30-something times the Guardian mentions the word drama in the Dawnbreaker, in the God Passes By as well. This whole thing, this most sublime drama is what the Dawnbreakers is discussed at. And this is what you have here, this huge drama that's taking place. The Guardian then wraps this up. The faith has now stepped in. He then talks about how in 20 years' time, from the inception of the first declaration, we're going to have this other revelation that we know, the Baha'u'llah's revelation that comes in. And he makes reference to these twin trumpet blasts. The first trumpet blast being, of course, that of His Holiness the Bab, the second one being that of His Holiness Baha'u'llah. Things are going to change. The laws are going to change the world, change the people and the rest of it. And this is what the Guardian's essentially setting out. Are there any comments or questions?
Can you go back to the text briefly? So, because at the end of this passage, the beloved Guardian attributes something to the secularization of the Muslim world, and I want to understand exactly what that is.
So I think this is talking about this process of disintegration and integration that we quite often as Baha'is talk about. From what I understand, the mere coming of Baha'u'llah and his laws is bringing about essentially the breakdown of some of these things. So like the way Islam was practiced in the Ottoman Empire has shifted somewhat. And the virtual abandonment of the law in Shia Persia is what he's predicting, from what I understand, and Egypt and the rest of it. He's saying that this is all going to change. Again, the vibrations that are released anytime a manifestation comes, we all know this, I don't need to share with you, are just mind-blowing, the things that we don't realize that are taking place that happened. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to, next session, go into the upheavals in Mazandaran, in Neres and Zanjan, these three battles that I keep talking about. And they're exciting, they're powerful, they're great, they're motivating, they make you want to stand up and really dive more into this faith and to really imbibe as we're told to do, right? And really take these things in and to drink as much as we can and get excited. Again, this is a soul-stirring narrative. The Dawnbreakers, this is what the Guardian refers to it as. And this is meant to stir our souls, and this bit of God Passes By is taking things from the Dawnbreakers, essentially. Unless there's any questions, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you very much. I will join you next time. Remember, all sessions are uploaded. If you want to catch up on anything, you can do. And if we could maybe end with some prayers, if there's anyone who would care to start us off with a prayer, maybe someone who's smiling and is in Spain might wish to do so to kick us off. But anyone, please. It is a huge pleasure again, but we've come to the end of time, unfortunately.
armado con el poder de tu nombre, nada podrá dañarme, y con tu amor en mi corazón no podrán de modo alguno alarmarme todas las tribulaciones del mundo. Armado con el poder de tu nombre, armado con el poder de tu nombre, armado con el poder de tu nombre, nada podrá dañarme, y con tu amor en mi corazón no podrán de modo alguno alarmarme todas las tribulaciones del mundo. Armado con el poder de tu nombre, nada podrá dañarme.